Hi, welcome everyone, welcome. I'll let you finish up your conversations. Thank you all for joining us in the room. We so appreciate you being here. And welcome to Duluth. You might see on our Facebook, we had a lot of fun yesterday taking in the sights here in Duluth for our Facebook. We also want to acknowledge this morning and celebrate the Ojibwe, Dakota, and other indigenous people whose traditional, contemporary, and ancestral lands that we are holding this event on. Thank you for joining the Fierceness Forum. Yes. Do we have some fierce ladies and barrier-breaking legislators in general ready to share their experience with you this morning? Yes, we do. Legislators, get ready because it's going to be amazing. You know, and our hope for Vote, Run, or Lead overall is that you see yourself, your kids, your neighbors, your family members in these legislators. The multitudes of identities they hold, indigenous, immigrant, new American, first generation, person of color, and so many more, two-spirit, non-binary, homeowners, taxpayers, and lawmakers. There's so many identities represented, and there's a place for you at the table, at the policy-making table. So they're going to share their insights and their experiences with running for office. They're going to talk about how they champion a reflective representation, what happens after you win, some expected, some not. And we love that they are the embodiment of the value in embracing, not erasing, our differences to create a stronger democracy. Vote, Run, Lead is working to build a more reflective and equitable democracy, and that's what we all deserve. We made huge strides last year in electing a historic, diverse legislature, and it did make a difference. We saw policies around paid family leave, safeguarding our LGBTQ community members, funding school meals, cannabis legislation, abortion access, and so many more. And without that reflective democracy, that couldn't have happened. But to truly reflect our communities, it will take 2 more generations in this state to make it happen. And we cannot wait. We need each of you at the decision-making table, and today we march onward towards that goal. I am so excited to have you here for the Fierceness Forum, and I want to introduce our Chief Political Officer for Vote, Run, Lead.
Oh goodness, I clearly forgot I was supposed to be at the front of the room, so just did a little jogging. My name's Sabrina Schulman. I am the Chief Political Officer at Vote, Run, Lead. I am New York based, but have been thrilled to spend a lot of time in Minnesota the last year since I joined the organization. It is we call it one of our anchor states. We talk about the Minnesota model when we talk about our Run 51 program, which is our moonshot goal to get gender parity in every state legislature in this country, so that the people we see on the ground in all of our states are reflected in our legislatures. They're the people making policy decisions, as Beth was talking about, and they're the voices debating the bills on the floors in our state houses, bringing their lives and their families and their communities into the state house as policy is prioritized, debated, and passed. So we talk about the Minnesota model because Minnesota has made amazing strides in the last few elections, and particularly this last year. I'm excited to be moderating a panel in a few moments with some of the new legislators that got seated in your state house this year, but wanted to just talk for a second about what we're doing across the country. So, Vote, Run, Lead trains women to run for office and win. And we do that by not only giving them the nuts and bolts tools that they need to run a successful campaign, but to remind them that they should run as they are, that you are the person that we've been waiting for to run for that seat. You don't need to be something different. You don't need to do something different. You don't need to figure out how to be the perfect candidate. You are that candidate already. And our trainings, we're going to be doing one this afternoon after this forum, are just to hone those skills and help you hone your message, figure out how to talk about who you are and why you're the right person for this seat, and then get the skills to make sure that you know how to just run the best race you can in your district. So we're excited to be here. We're excited to be talking with some of the legislators who have gone through our trainings, who successfully ran last year, talk about what they did this year, which was unbelievably amazing. That's the other reason we're now talking about the Minnesota model, because our theory of change is if you get a representative democracy, you will see the kind of change that actually helps the folks on the ground, and Minnesota did that this year, and we're so excited to talk about it. So I know we're running a little bit late. I'm not going to go on too much longer. I am going to hand it back over to Beth to introduce the mayor of Duluth.
Talk about another amazing elected official. I have the opportunity to introduce Mayor Emily Larson to do a welcome. And I've known the mayor since well before she was mayor, through training through the Vote Run Lead. And I am so glad to welcome you to the stage for your comments.
Okay, Beth, thank you so much. Sabrina, thank you. Thank you, Vote Run Lead. I have been doing these trainings for years, and means a lot to be here today, so thank you for that. Okay, we're just going to have fun with this welcome. Welcome, everybody. We're going to have great conversations. We're going to do good work together. We're going to hear from amazing leaders who are moving our state forward. But before we do that, I want to tell you a story, because stories, I think, are the most important way that we share who we are, what we're about, where we're going, why we want to get there. And my story is actually not so much directly political, but I have a group of friends, my girlfriends, and when something big happens in one of our lives, we go thrift shopping. And we buy something for that person. And so when I got married 24 years ago, 22 years ago, something like that now, for my baby shower, for my wedding shower, my best group of girlfriends gave me this board game that they had each pitched in, and it cost $1 total. And that's the fun, right? Is everyone put in like 10 cents. And the game, I don't know if you've heard of it, it is called What Shall I Be? Anybody? You guys, it's an exciting game of career girls. And I want to tell you about this board game. It is from 1966. And it is a game where, and I'm going to talk about really in a binary language, so I'm going to talk about women primarily as I describe this game, because that is the game as it was written. So it is a game of exciting careers for girls, and there are 5 careers that you could have in 1966. And I feel like they should have at least had like 10 in 1966, but whatever. Okay, so what do you think the 5 careers are? Nurse, yep. Teacher, not an option. Sorry, but good answer. We lift each other up. Okay, so nurse, teacher, no. Good ideas though. Model, dancer, and flight attendant. Okay? So the goal of the game is to get a career and be a career girl. And in order to do that, you have to go through personality cards, and you have to collect personality cards, and you have to collect training cards. And the training cards do actually include charm school, which is required for the majority of the professions for career girls. But the personality cards, these are really, really bad. They're so bad. There is one that, so you literally pick it up and it says, you are overweight. And then it says, that is bad if you want to be a flight attendant, a dancer, or a model. Apparently okay if you want to be a nurse or teacher, I don't know. You are pretty. That's okay if you want to be a model or an actress. You are clumsy. It's only okay to be clumsy if you want to be a teacher. You are a quick thinker. And that only works if you want to be a nurse or a flight attendant. You are a hard worker. That's really good if you want to be a nurse. And one of the last personality cards is you are strong. And that's only good if you want to be a ballet dancer or a nurse. So I talk about this game because I played it with my kid once. He's 22 now. He was probably 7 or 8 years old, and we were really into board games. And so I was like, Gabe, let's play. What shall I be? And so we set it up, and about 7, 8, 9 minutes into the game, he's like, Mom, this isn't fun. I don't want to be any of these things. And it's just the example of what we are having to build our lives on now. These stories and expectations of who we're supposed to be, how we're supposed to get there, what we're supposed to look like, how we're supposed to show up, who's giving us permission, and who it is we're supposed to be. This wasn't that long ago. This was certainly my older siblings. I was not born in 1966, but I was born in the 70s. These were the lessons that we have been told for generations, and they are the lessons we are unlearning, and we are reteaching, and we are redoing. And so as we go into today and this panel and this work, I want you to know that you are strong, and you are fierce, and you are here, and you are surviving, and you are meant to run, and you are meant to win. And you don't need a personality card. You don't need people's permission. You don't need to win everyone over. You need to show up as yourself because you've got everything that you need. And to me, policymaking, that is the exciting work of a career person. So welcome to the day. I hope it is as meaningful as these trainings have been for me in the past. And I am here to help you vote and help you run and help you lead and help you win. So thank you.
Wow, that was incredible. I always love listening to you speak. It's just a board game and all. So we actually have a surprise video for each of you from Senator Amy Klobuchar. And she has some words for us today about running and leading as well.
Hello, everyone. I want to start by thanking Mayor Emily Larson for kicking off today's Fierceness Forum. Emily Larson is someone who is fierce in a nice package, and she's just done an incredible job in the city of Duluth. We're so proud of her. It's great to join many of the incredible candidates, campaign managers, strategists, fighting to strengthen our democracy by elevating more women to elected office in our state. Think about it. It was not that long ago when we had no women in the legislature. It was not that long ago that we had hardly any women statewide. We had Lieutenant Governor and the Secretary of State back then, Secretary of State Joan Grow. And now what do we have? Half of the congressional delegation is women. We are one of only 4 states in the country that have 2 women, not 1, 2 women U.S. senators. That is called voting, that is called running, and that is called leading. Thank you for being such a force for women candidates in our state and across the country. And with this year's launch of the VRLHQ platform, full of helpful resources for running successful campaigns, I know you are going to be unstoppable. You know, one of my favorite aspects of Vote Run Lead's mission is the way you encourage candidates to run as you are. My career in public service was shaped in part by that idea, run as you are. For me, it was the experience of being a young mom. When our daughter Abigail was born, she was sick and unable to swallow. But at the time, because of insurance company rules, hospitals only allowed a 24-hour stay for new moms. So even though Abigail was really sick and I had not slept for 2 days, I was forced out of the hospital when the 24 hours were up. As my husband wheeled me out the hospital door that night, dizzy, exhausted, and still in pain, I asked him whether he thought this would be happening to the spouse of an insurance company executive under the same circumstances. I answered the question myself. I don't think so. So once Abigail's health began slowly improving, I spent a lot of time thinking about what happened and joined forces with other moms and decided I didn't want any other mom to go through what I had experienced. Even though I wasn't an elected official, never testified at the state capitol before, I became determined to change the policy. I began calling my legislators. I testified at the state capitol. I showed up at the conference committee with 6 visibly pregnant friends. So when the legislators asked, well, when should this bill take effect? Because lobbyists, some of them were trying to quietly get it delayed, so it was passed August 1st. All my friends raised their hands and said, no, they actually moved it up. So it was right when the governor signed it into law. They didn't even wait until August 1st. That's how we passed one of the first laws in the nation guaranteeing new moms and their babies a 48-hour hospital stay. It was later adopted on the federal level. That was it for me. I got hooked on politics. I got hooked on getting things done in the government. I realized you can do it. So here's some good news. Women have shown time and time again that we know how to get things done. And when given the chance to lead, we are even more productive, big surprise, than our male counterparts. I can tell you that the women I work with in the Senate are some of the most effective legislators I know. But don't take it from me, a study by Harvard, or as I call it, the UMD of the East, proved it. The study had 3 conclusions looking at the numbers. 1, women work harder. 2, we work together. And 3, this one may be the most important, we support each other. That's the point. Look, we have Speaker Melissa Hartman. We have Majority Leader Carrie Dietzek. We have Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan, not just in the room, but at the heads of the table. We made sure this last session in Minnesota that every student in our state can get free breakfast and lunch at school. We took huge steps to tackle climate change. And with the passage of the PRO Act, we sent a message to everyone that Minnesota is a place where women are safe to pursue their own health care. I work in Washington with Tina and Betty and Angie and Ilhan, and I've seen them on the Senate and House floors, as well as behind closed doors, fighting to defend Social Security and Medicare, lower costs for families, and protect reproductive rights. We are just 2 days, friends, from the anniversary of the Dobbs decision, that day when the Supreme Court decided to overturn half a century of precedent on a woman's right to make her own health care decisions. You know, that's when we realized that they didn't just want to take us back to the 1950s, it was the 1850s. The leaked Alito opinion even cited treatises from the Middle Ages. I mean, why live in the present when they nailed it back in 1223? So it isn't 1223, it's 2023. And we must codify Roe v. Wade into law. Because vote, run, lead, we don't move backwards, we move forward. We've also got to remember that our democracy itself is on the line. That's where you come in. You come in advocating for democracy. You come in and saying we shouldn't do things like what they did in Georgia when they banned voting on a Saturday in the runoff. You come in and say we are going to stand up for the poll workers. We're going to stand up for the people who are protecting our democracy. And what happens when we refuse to be complacent, when we never give up? Even when people tried to count us out, we keep knocking and calling and making the case for our candidates. We have to fight hard in every race up and down the ballot. When I first run, I won by something like 10 votes per precinct in Hennepin County. And I thought back to it, I did 29 parades, I put up 3,000 lawn signs, and I went to hundreds of pancake breakfasts. Some days I think if I'd gone to 5 less parades, I probably wouldn't have won. You know that everything matters. Your work, we can still win, and we can win together. As we move on to this next challenge, we must, as Amanda Gorman, the youngest inaugural poet ever, reminded us when she read her inaugural poem that she had composed in 2 weeks between the insurrection and the inauguration. As she said in that poem, with that bright yellow coat under that blue sky, she said, we must find light in this never-ending shade. Sure, you can lament the setbacks, but you should never forget the joy in the comebacks. And vote, run, lead, you know comebacks. Thanks for supporting great candidates for these upcoming municipal elections and in 2024. Thanks for your dedication. Enjoy the rest of the Fierceness Forum. I need you. Let's win together. Thanks.
hi, everyone. What a fantastic message to kick off this panel. Can I invite our legislators to come join me up here? You don't have to sit in this order, but sure, why not? So while they're working their way up, we're going to start the conversation portion of this with our amazing freshman state legislators who have joined us today. All right, come on. So when the DFL ran the table in Minnesota this last fall election, they did so with the most diverse and representative slate of candidates in Minnesota history. First non-binary two-spirit candidate, first Black women in the Senate, 3 of them all at once. Yeah. First millennial and youngest woman elected. Excuse me, first transgender woman, first woman veteran. A lot of firsts for one election. And in Vote Run Lead, we know that having a representative democracy is the only way to achieve policy change that truly sees and speaks to the needs of all constituents, which is why I'm incredibly proud to be here today with 3 of the freshman state legislators who represent some of those historic firsts for their communities and for the state, each of whom has proven the theory of change, that reflective representation that embraces a diversity of communities and identities builds a stronger democracy. So we are inspired by the specific ways that these barrier-breaking panelists represent their communities and themselves while remaining united in their passion for social justice and building collective power. So I am going to introduce each of them briefly, and then we are going to dive right into some questions. So, starting on farthest from me, Representative Leash Kozlowski was born and raised in their homelands of Duluth, Minnesota. As a first-generation college grad, they earned a degree in history from the University of Minnesota Duluth and an MBA from the College of St. Scholastica. They worked in business development, higher education, and most recently served as community relations officer for the city of Duluth. Rep. Kozlowski is a proud Mexican-American Anishinaabe, I tried that so many times, Anishinaabe Ojibwe, who is a co-leader of QUIPAC, an indigenous wellness group. Rep. Kozlowski is serving their first term representing Eastern Duluth and is the first non-binary two-spirit person to be elected to the Minnesota legislature. They serve as the vice chair of the DFL House People of Color and Indigenous Caucus and are actively committed to rebuilding community health and wealth for generations to come. Please join me in welcoming them to our panel. Thank you. And my apologies for the mispronunciation. Okay, second on the panel, we have Senator Zainab Mohammed, who's an organizer, immigrant, and state senator from South Minneapolis. When she was just 9 years old, Senator Mohammed and her family immigrated to Minnesota from Somalia. She grew up in a working-class household with 9 brothers and sisters and 2 parents working union jobs. She attended public schools, helped raise her younger sister, and began working at a young age in order to help support her family. As a community organizer at the Minnesota chapter of the Council on American Islamic Relations, Senator Mohammed collaborated with community members, faith leaders, and elected officials to defend Minnesotans' civil rights. She later worked at Minneapolis City Hall before deciding to run for the Senate. When she won her race last fall, she became the youngest woman ever to do so at the age of 25. She was also the first ever Muslim American woman and among the first 3 Black women to ever serve in Minnesota's upper chamber. Thank you. Okay, finally, sitting closest to me, we have Representative Liz Lee, who is a proud Hmong daughter of St. Paul's East Side. She and her siblings were raised by dedicated public servant parents in the Hayden Heights neighborhood. Representative Lee is a first-generation American whose parents fled the Civil War in Laos, relocating to Minnesota. As the child of parents who stressed the importance and value of public service, her parents taught her to work hard and dream big. She began her journey in a Head Start classroom, later moving on in life to attend Yale University, and fought to secure funding for computer science education courses for girls and students of color to have as much success as she has. The representative has spent a decade advocating for policies that benefit working families in Minnesota and across the country, like affordable housing, education equity, health equity, and increased access to public transit. Join me in welcoming Representative Lee. Okay. All right, now we know who we've got. Let's dig in. So this is a question for everybody. I welcome whoever would like to start. There's obviously a lot of chatter, we've talked a lot about it this morning, about how the new governing majority in Minnesota swiftly and together passed one of the most progressive governing agendas to date. Right now, all eyes are on Minnesota for lessons learned, how other places can hopefully do the same. And what we want to know is, what was the strategy going into session? And how did you navigate the levers of government to pass some of the key pieces of legislation in this agenda, particularly knowing that even with a governing and progressive majority, there's a lot of diversity still of thought and positions and identities. Whoever would like to start that question, I welcome.
I guess I'm starting. Hi, everybody. It's good to be here with all of you. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Sabrina. How did we come to this? You know, I would say, first of all, the things that we passed this year are majority policies that people have been working on for over 10 years. And they're not anything new. I think most people were familiar with it. Communities have been waiting for us to get these done. Obviously, we have a very diverse caucus, folks who are from up here, from Grant, who's from, I think even northern from here. We have Senator Kupek, who is from, and then there's me, South Minneapolis. Like, all of our districts are extremely different from political perspective to issue perspectives, but we all had one perspective in mind, and that is to make sure that we're not in gridlock and that we do deliver for the people of our state. And I think based on that, with hard conversations, we were able to maintain our positions. And now that we're done, it's about speaking to how those things are affecting people in a positive way.
That's great. Yeah, that's right.
I can go next.
Sure.
I would say, like, really looking at what we did this session, I mean, I think it's a BFD, we can say that, right? That was many years in the making, and coming into this work, we talked a lot about, as we revived and had a resurgence in, like, the DFL Latino caucus, we called it movimiento, which means movement, because this has really been movement from across the state, from many different sectors, whether you're fighting for workers' rights or healthcare for all, reproductive justice, right, fighting for trans and gender-expansive rights. I think it was really compelling how we all came together in this united front. On the Senate side, you had, what, a 1-vote margin in the House. We needed 68 votes to get anything off the House floor to send it over to our friends in the Senate, but we really only had 3-vote margin over there. And so coming in, I also think a lot of kudos to very diverse, and that also includes communities of color, immigrant communities, queer communities, but also the movement for the MVP, which is the Minnesota Values Project, that actually was originally headed by our own Representative Liz Olson, to be able to come around, like, when we're ready to go, we want to be, like, off to the races, right? We don't want to be figuring out what are the things that we need to go. And I think we came in very clear with a mission from Minnesotans. I know here in Eastern Duluth, it was very clear the things that, here's why we're sending you here, right? Racial equity, reproductive justice, all of these things, housing. And we came in and we delivered because we were stood strong and united. And I think also because we had the most diverse legislature. We've got the Posse Caucus. We've created the Queer Caucus with a historic number of LGBTQ folks. That's not the first time we've had queer folks at the Capitol. It's just sort of the time that we had this watershed moment where we had the power, we had the votes to say, hey, we have the microphones and we have the gavels, and we're going to make some decisions and direct those resources. And I think it also speaks to the leadership that we had in Speaker Hortman on our side, Senator Dietzick, to be able to share that power and to co-govern with even the legislators who are diverse. But whether you showed up at the Capitol or you were celebrating, July 1st, August 1st, as more things roll out, as the laws come into effect, and you were wearing purple for pensions and workers' rights, or you're wearing orange for infrastructure, or you're wearing green for reproductive justice, we all came there from lots of different directions, but ultimately to make the Minnesota that we want and that we deserve. And we said, we can, we will, watch us.
Absolutely. Thanks, Rep. Kozlowski. Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Rep. Leslie. I just want to add a little bit to this because these have been amazing responses. I think it started at the very beginning with organizing. And so, I would say we are really lucky to get a really clear mandate from our voters and from our community. And I think the hope is, right, to help folks turn out this year in preparation for 24, right? That's our goal. And I think I just want to emphasize what Rep. Kozlowski mentioned with the MVP project, making sure that, once all of us were elected as the youngest and the most diverse legislature, we were able to continue working with the outside groups that, gave us this mandate and this power. And I thought, just the way that all of the stakeholders worked together throughout the legislative session was really important. And I want to say, we really do owe a lot to our leadership, making sure that everybody had something to bring back home to their communities and say, hey, like I was in St. Paul for 5 months, and this is what I got for all of us. And at the core of that is, I know everyone kind of like makes fun of one Minnesota, but when you think about it, right? I had a really good chair in Dave Lislegard from all the way up here in Virginia and Aurora, and for us, it was really important to make sure that people got property tax refunds, right? Whether you're in the cities or you're up north, like everyone has seen their property taxes increase, and we want to make sure that people continue to stay in their homes. And so I think we did a good job making sure that we relied on our shared values and remembering that, at the end of the day, we just want to make sure that people are able to live their lives to the fullest. And I think, like Senator Mohammed said, we may have some, differences in maybe how we approach things, but at the core of it, we just want to make sure that we improve everyone's lives in Minnesota. So that's probably a really big answer to your question. But
That's
we can go into
okay.
details.
I'm going to dig into each of these a little bit as we move on. So that was actually the perfect setup. I appreciate that. But first, I want to talk a little bit more about like your personal experiences. You're all first-time legislators. This was your first full session at the Statehouse, and I think I often hear from women and others looking to run for office that the most intimidating thing is like what do I literally do when I get there, right? So I would love for each of you to talk a little bit about what was the most surprising thing about your first session, what caught you off guard, or was there anything you wish you had like known a little more about, or was like a pleasant surprise? What was it like to be a first-time legislator at the Statehouse?
I guess I could start. Yeah. So I had a bit of a different experience. I didn't start in city government, unlike my co-panelists, which I just learned today. We're learning a lot about each other this morning. I actually started working for Senator Amy Klobuchar. That was my first job out of college. And so my impression was very different, but now I understand. I've worked for a lot of different principals who, would wake up really early at 5 a.m., and wouldn't go to bed until like 1, 2 in the morning. And I think for me, becoming a legislator on my own really made me appreciate that energy and that drive. I was very honest with folks. Like I was extremely tired every day. And I think all of us were really tired. But what I didn't appreciate was, making sure that you're always grounded in like why you are working. I think as a staffer, you know, you can be at your desk, you're writing memos and stuff, and you're just like in one spot all day. But it really made me appreciate, you know, when you're a principal and you were like going to like 20 different places in a day, how exhausting that is, physically and then also mentally. And so that was different and very, very unexpected, but also very rewarding.
I'll go next. You know, wow, what hasn't surprised me is the question. You know, I come from city government. I worked with council member. I worked for a council member, and so I had known somewhat how a government functioned and how to get things done, but I didn't know how to get things done in like 67 people body. You know, I was used to getting 8 votes is all I needed to get things done, not 34. But I would say what surprised me most as a first-time legislator is, to be quite frank, how much the fact that there's not a lot of support for first-time legislators. You kind of get elected and you're like, good luck. Figure it out, get things done, and make sure you deliver. So there isn't like, it's not your typical job where you're getting, you know, accustomed to what's happening. You get a training, like it's like figure it out. So I think that was a surprise for me. Because we did have an orientation, but I don't really think it was how to legislate. It was about what to wear. And the fact that you have to wear a suit and look nice. That was a surprise to me. You know, I was surprised. I ran a race where I had a primary challenger and took positions that were extremely progressive. And so I had known going into it, I obviously had a certain level of like a perspective of going into what people would think of me. But you go in and you have a lot more friends than you expected. That was a surprise to me. And then also the fact that I think going into it mentally, I had expected this like huge political job, which it is. And then you have opposition, you have support, and there are challenges in between those things. But the thing that I think surprised me most is if you just treat it like a regular job and you come in as like your regular human self, you actually come to make friendships and relationships and people who you don't agree with on a policy level, but it's okay because ultimately we are both humans and we can have a normal conversation and be friends. And I can ask about your family, you can ask, we can actually be friends. We don't have to agree on anything, which I think was a surprise for me on a personal level. Thank you.
Yeah, oh my gosh, I'm always just blown away. It's really awesome to work with the two of them, with Senator Mohammed and Representative Liz Lee. I learned so much and step more fully as both of them I heard talk about bringing your full self into this space, and that can be really jarring in these spaces. And also, I feel like as a new legislator that I step more fully into my own humanity, and that feels really awesome. And to step into myself, you know, I think it's no surprise that for me, as my gender identity has evolved and I've stepped more into being non-binary and two-spirit and just fully own that and fully own and bring in being a super proud Indigenous person to this space. And that I was really nervous coming in, like, am I gonna have to shrink or hide? And I had a lot of people on the campaign trail actually who said, like, you shouldn't run and lead with that. But for me, I wear this strawberry every day because as Anishinaabe Ojibwe people, we're known as the people of the heart way, and so you speak from the heart, you lead from the heart, you think from the heart, you act from the heart. And to me, that was really important to bring that into a space where every single day we walk into the Capitol, there's things, my gosh, the Senate, I feel a little bad for you all. You can only drink water. You can't even have like a tag or like sticker on it.
It also can't be on your desk.
Yeah, and you can't have like candy, man. I was eating like licorice. We had snacks. We were having
They
licorice
get to wear jeans?
contest. Yeah, you can wear jeans with a suit, and so it was shocking how restrictive it was. And then how do you, within that space, you know, I love to wear my moccasins and beaded clothing. You know, we have lots of folks who like to wear their cultural clothes as well. And so it was really cool to see the way that we shifted even just what is sort of the norms, right? That's really important to not just go in and like be there and be a token, but to actually disrupt how it is operating. And so that was really exciting and also like shocking how restrictive it was there. And also I think that lends into the Senate and the House. I thought that I'd see like Senator Jen McEwen and my friends who we had spent a lot of time before we came in and got elected together and had built that kinship. But House and Senate members, unless you're like, hey, come meet me in the hallway, or like you're doing something very specific and intentional, our paths don't always cross. Our tracks don't always cross. And so one of the things that was really important for the posse and the Queer Caucus was, hey, we set bi-weekly meetings with the Senate and the House and the governor's office to make sure that we are in alignment and we have that braid and that we're in line with our communities. Gosh, there's just so much. I mean, I was really shocked as a Greater Minnesota member that there was very limited remote options, and I see some folks in the room who were down at the Capitol who, made the drive, the 2.5-hour drive. You might have taken off work, spent the gas money, right? But there were hearings that we had done, for example, with our communities of color, and I took a $100 bill out of my pocket because I know that they didn't have a day vacation time, and they didn't have the money to pay the gas to come down and testify. And so those are the things that I think it's really important to continue to work on. And sitting in a space, I remember Lieutenant Governor Flanagan had said before we got in there was that you're going to sit in this House chambers that has a picture of Abraham Lincoln, who, if you know American history, was not super great for people of color, especially Native folks. And in fact, it's actually illegal for Dakota people to stand in the House chambers after the Dakota 38+2. And so to be in a space every day where you look up and it's a visible reminder, which I think we should take down. But it's a visible reminder, right, of like, this place was not only not made for you, it was made to exclude people like us, and to bring our full selves in there and change these policies was really powerful. And I think that's honestly how a lot of this stuff got done.
Just to add one thing, I went from a campaign trail of like seeing Leash and Liz all the time. They were like my homies, and then I go in and I hang out with people who I've never seen before. They're my new homies, but I miss them.
Well, we're glad we could provide an opportunity for you all to hang out again today. Thank you all for that. I feel like I smell some like chamber rules reform movement coming. I feel like the no food and drink on the, I don't know about here, I'm from New York, but they have some all-nighter sessions. I don't know how they would do it without food on the desk. So I actually want to, Representative Kozlowski, I want to continue with you, something you mentioned. So as you noted, you're the first two-spirit, non-binary member of the Minnesota State Legislature, and you formed a queer caucus this year. You talk a lot about queer liberation, but you don't just talk. You have made progress this year, right, including the trans refuge bill. And I would love to hear you talk a little bit about how, having more representative folks in the chamber and having this caucus helped change how you navigated getting a bill like that passed. How did you work inside the Statehouse? How did you work outside the Statehouse with community members to get that passed? And it's sort of a two-part question within that. I'd love you to also address, we know when bills like that are debated anywhere in this country or really the planet, it gets ugly. And folks on the other side are not necessarily respectful, and it can be really challenging. So within all of that, how did you take care of yourselves and your community and each other through that process moving towards success?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I've been learning a new word to replace transphobia, and that's transmesia, which is moving from the fear of trans folks, which most people just don't know us, have never been around us, spent time in. Transmesia actually means the hatred of trans people. And I think that clearly marked, in the backdrop of the national landscape, there is no doubt an attempt to just straight up eradicate trans and gender nonconforming folks and two-spirit people. And that was a really intense way to come into the session. And one of the things that we were very intentional coming in was just even where we sit and who we office next to. So Representative Lee Finke, she is so amazing as the first trans woman at the Capitol, and we office together, we sit next to each other, we are each other's buddy systems, just because we know we need that built-in support for the days that are going great and we're getting wins, but we also know that we're gonna face a lot of headwinds. And so, like I had mentioned, that this isn't the first session that there's been queer folks at the Capitol. We've had folks like Susan Allen and Scott Dibble, and Representative Athena Hollins, who's now our majority leader, in these spaces, but this was the first time that we established an official queer caucus. And, you know, our big scary gay agenda is just that everybody is living and that our queer youth, shout out to Transforming Families, I've got Celebrate Trans Kids shirt on, because what we really want is for queer youth to become queer adults, to become queer elders, to become transcestors. And within that, you know, similar to how we did with the DFL, having an MVP, this plan across housing and policing and community safety and safety and all these other aspects. We did that for our Queer Caucus to go out, and we spent the first, before we got there, but then into the first month, really hearing youth and hearing our medical providers and talking to our educators. And they told us really loud and clear that the top 2 priorities for our queer folks in Minnesota was we need to protect and expand gender affirming healthcare, which is healthcare, and we also need to go into where our youth are spending their time, and that is in the schools. And so that's doing things like our LGBTQ and trans inclusive policy, a bill that I was really proud to carry with a lot of our youth in Duluth who actually wrote and testified and worked on that bill, was to make sure that we have gender inclusive school restrooms and locker rooms. I mean, I can tell you what, at the Capitol was not ready for somebody like me to come in. Bathrooms, hello, that shouldn't be the thing that trips anybody up. And talking with youth, they're literally holding their bladder and getting infections, and so many spaces like that just should not be the thing that causes so much anxiety. And so I guess within that, we knew the priorities that we needed to rapidly get across the finish line, but we weren't really sure how the rest of folks who are not trans were going to receive that. And so we spent a lot of time just educating, honestly, basically just like pronouns. My first week at the Capitol was met with a lot of like anger at using they them pronouns and frustration. And so we were able to like work through our leadership, did some trainings. We brought in some educators. We did a lot of talking within our caucus on the Senate side and the House side. Just basic, like, this is who we are. And we're not scary. We're just like really cool, rad people. And then we were able to meet with the governor's office, meet with legislators, our amazing coalition partners like Outfront Minnesota, Northland, Transforming Families, all these folks who are either with nonprofits or like grassroots groups, and just our youth were actually showed up. We did the first ever like Trans Day of Visibility, a celebration, which is great when people want to like relegate you to the closet or the coffin, to be just like, we're at the Capitol and we're having a drag show and we're doing our thing, and we're just like claiming this space as the people's house. So I think that was a really beautiful like braiding together just all the things. I had a boss one time who was like, you know, throw enough spaghetti at the wall and something's bound to stick. And that's really what we took that approach. And we did be met with, you know, a lot of like racism and death threats, and those things were there. And if you tuned in at all to the House floor on like the night of Trans Refuge, you know that it was just really atrocious. And honestly, we just put headphones in, and we just said, you picked on the wrong community, like, try us, like, we got the votes and we're gonna do this. And thankfully, our colleagues, even some folks who just were a little bit unsure, or they weren't sure how that was gonna be met if they voted for a bill, it was a lot of just relationship, like what we've been hearing. You know, we came here to make change, we didn't come here to make friends, but I think that we did come here to make kinship with Minnesotans and each other, and that's how we did it.
That's great. Thank you so much for that. Senator Mohammed, you also made some waves this session with a lot of racial equity and racial justice legislation, many issues that had floundered for years that have been talked about, but there wasn't the will or the support to do it. I'd love you to walk us through some of what it took to get the driver's license for all bill through. And, you know, what, besides the governing trifecta, you know, what do you feel was different this year? What gave you the momentum? What were the challenges, and how did you work through those?
That's a good question. You know, I would say the community, I think Leisha is certainly right, were a huge part of that. This was a bill that Community members came together over 15 years ago and said, we can't believe that this got, this like law that we had got revoked from us, and because of it now we have no idea how to get to work, and if we get to work, we don't know how to get back home to our families without being afraid. And so they came together, they wrote a policy over 15 years ago, and they came year after year after year, and when we had the last trifecta, they came really close, the Senate passed it, and the House decided not to take up, and I think they've never given up. I think even when we were in the minority, they didn't think that, they basically said, Democrats couldn't get it done in 2012 when we had the trifecta, or 2010, then maybe Republicans will do it, or maybe we'll do it in divided government. We never did. And so going into it, when we won the trifecta, I think we had found out like 3 a.m. because we were staring at Grant's photo for so long. And, I remember we got the trifecta, and at 7 a.m. I got a text message from my predecessor. Yeah, my predecessor. PTO, I didn't know if I was a successor. And she said, you have to get driver's licenses done. And I said, okay. And then, so no problem. And then Representative Carlos Mariani texted me, and he said, I'd been there for 30 years, and this is my biggest regret. If you can get it done, it would be like, it would make my life. And I said, you don't have to tell me. This was already in the back of my mind, but I had no idea you guys were all thinking about it. And I think like a day later, we had a meeting at 12 o'clock, and man, so many people showed up from just across the state, like thousands of people in this really hot, tiny gym in South Minneapolis that was really stinky. And people were like outside waiting to just talk to me and Representative Gomez and Representative Perez Vega. And I had no idea at that point I was even carrying the bill. And then I found out Senator Champion had been carrying the bill for years. And I went up to him when we had a meeting, and I had met him maybe once, and I said, hey, so I'm carrying driver's licenses. And he said, come again? I said, I'm carrying driver's licenses. And he's like, no, you're not. I said, yeah, I am. And he's like, and he then walked me through the history of it and some of the issues that happened over the years. And he allowed me to carry it, but really this is the work that he did. He set the precedents for over like a decade. So I try to not take credit. It really is the work of the people in the community. And one of the things I learned from him doing that was he said, you're always going to have community support because these people have been coming and they'll continue to come and expand. But how do you get the people who do not believe that these people deserve any rights? Who believe that, documentation is the only way for you to have some sort of rights across our state. But we still need you to work and we still need you to pay taxes. But how to get home, figure it out, And so it was about telling a story about the fact that this was about simply human dignity. It was about the rights of people and giving it back to them. And then for folks who didn't agree, usually they speak money. So it was about letting them know this is about our economy, it's about the safety of our roads. But for me, on a personal level, it was about letting those people know that they do have the dignity and the right to drive in our streets safely and to not be scared of law enforcement. And then for my colleagues, I had spoke to the members who I knew would support it, and I had known I have somewhat of a support, and then I spoke to the members who had never heard about this, who were like, I don't understand why this is such a controversial thing. And I'm like, yeah, we're new. So it is, and we have to get it done. And it has to be one of the first things we have to get it done. And explaining it to them, telling them the stories. And I think at one point, maybe like a month into the session, I kind of just laid off them. And then I let their communities go and speak to them. Because these people had been organizing so much. They were sending people from the North Shore. Our people live there. And that was beautiful to just be like people like, who are considered greater Minnesota, who don't represent our communities, quote unquote, be like, your community's kind of all over my district. I'm like, yeah, we're everywhere. We're just hiding a little bit because we don't know what's happening. So, yeah. So we got it done, and I think it was mainly the community, the people that did the work, and we just kind of led on their work. We really took votes, but it's their work, and they deserve that.
Thank you for that. Yeah. So you mentioned taxes. Representative Lee, so you were on the tax conference committee, and I gather that it was a very different final tax bill this year than it's been in the past, and maybe served communities a bit better. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about why you think the different voices in the legislature this year changed that process, how you think that impacted decisions on the final bill, and what you're most proud of coming out of, you mentioned property taxes, but what you're most proud of out of that process, and what you think was a little different this year in that final bill because of who was in the legislature.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to answer this by stepping back a little bit and also giving an answer that maybe can kind of touch some of the previous questions, because I did want to say that, I mean, the biggest part is like we knew we had the votes, right? Even though our majorities were very slim, I think we worked really hard in our caucuses to make sure that, we had a really good vote count. So we knew that was going to happen because that's what the voters gave us, right? We had this amazing mandate. People were asking for property tax relief, driver's licenses, trans refuge, banning conversion therapy, right? Like all these really, really important things that, everywhere in Minnesota families are asking for. But I also did want to say, like, we did it, but also because we had a good leadership that was really intentional about when we would pass this and how we would do it. So just as someone who also was an assistant majority leader, I wanted to touch a little bit about, the debates that we had over kind of like the really tough bills that we had to pass, whether, it was making sure that we were prepared for like anti-immigrant rhetoric or anti-trans rhetoric on like the floor. I think we knew like, we would have to prepare for the worst, and we had like a plan to address that. And so I just did want to like give credit to leadership where it's due, making sure that people know like we have a really intentional leader in Speaker Hortman and the majority leader, and just making sure that yes, we're gonna like enact all of this change, but it takes a lot of also preparation to address for like the worst, right? Because as legislators, like you get hit with a lot, and that's something that Rep. Kozlowski is not talking about a lot, right? But you're taking the vote, but there's also all this like emotional toll that is a part of being a principal and being like a policy leader, right? So I do want to say like, we do have to give credit to leadership for making sure that all of us had space to be our authentic selves and pushing for legislation that made sense. I think for me, I come to this work as a progressive because I'm a child who grew up in poverty. I was a Head Start kid, was a WIC kid, and I was very lucky to become who I am today, right? I mean, I'm I guess like the product where like all of these resources work the way they're supposed to, and so for me, obviously, I had a very personal experience understanding how tax credits can work and can support our working families across Minnesota. But also, again, want to credit our amazing tax chair, Aisha Gomez, who also passed driver's license for all. She's been there for a really long time, and I don't know, she might kill me if I say this. Also one of the, the posse elders, right? Just seeing how this work has gone. Yeah, don't kill me, Chair Gomez, right? But organizing with the community and working on this legislation for many, many years, and really using this moment to say, hey, like, I am the tax chair. We are gonna make sure that with this huge surplus, people's tax dollars are gonna be given back to them and work for them. And we're not gonna put this, in other places where they could be, like in corporate subsidies or whatever. And we also worked really, really hard to actually get a tax bill. Last session, we did not have a tax bill. The House passed its version, right, but they couldn't get a final deal. So I really appreciated watching our tax chair, just seeing how much she worked and, making sure that, like for her, like it was beautiful watching how she had a list of things that she really, really had to have, right? Like the non-negotiables, to make sure that, we support working families. I think one of the things that she and I are probably most proud of, right, is making sure that with the tax bill, we cut child poverty by at least a third. And that is something that we've never done before. But with our amazing staff and the surplus, we combine two things that Minnesota has. We have a working family tax credit and we have a child tax credit. So just taking that and leveraging the opportunity for a tax bill and the surplus, we wanted to make sure that we give a lot back to Minnesota families. And so you've probably seen that a family can get as much as like $1,300 with the tax rebates, right, or the one-time WALS checks. But actually, when you think about the child tax credit and the education credits and like everything else that we passed, like we are giving back thousands of dollars to families in just credits that are refundable. So that means that if you don't pay taxes, you get a lot of money back. And then we also did a lot in the property tax space to help both renters and homeowners. And that's really important because renters, I'm a renter. Renters have not been represented at the Capitol as much as they have been now too. So again, we're the youngest, most diverse legislature ever, and that also means a lot of us don't own homes. Some of us may never own homes just because of the way the market is. And so we did a lot of reforms to the tax code to make sure that renters are able to take advantage of Minnesota's renters tax credit, because we help our landlords pay their property taxes as well. So did a lot of really good things for working families, and I think that's because so many of us on the committee and also in the caucus had these lived experiences where we understand like this is what everyday Minnesotans go through, and we have to have a way to support them, which may be different from past legislatures where maybe it didn't matter to people if a tax bill did not pass. So,
Thank you.
yeah.
So, you all did amazing things this session. You've talked about some of them. There's a whole list of other progressive pieces of legislation that passed. What's next? What was left on the table for you this session? What do you wish you had gotten to and didn't, or maybe hasn't even been introduced yet, but how are you looking at your work moving into next session? I know you just ended this one, I'm sorry to make you think about next year. But what are you thinking about? You ran big, amazing campaigns with lots of ideas. What's on deck for you? What are you really thinking about starting to form a movement around for the next legislative session and into the future? Anybody could start that one.
Okay, I'll start, I think.
Yeah, go.
So much. Everyone's like, are you guys done? I'm like, no, I have 4 years. And I expect every session to be exactly like this. And I expect us to have $20 billion every session. No, but I think, Liz talked a little bit about being a renter. I actually ran on being a renter. I talked a lot about in my city where rent is too high and our cost of living is just not keeping up with how much the money that we make. I'm a legislator. I don't make that much money, and my rent is way too high, and my room is way too small. And so I ran on that, and so I'm in the housing committee, and one of the things I worked on is the Bring It Home bill, which is growing up my family. When we immigrated here, we had Section 8 vouchers, if you know what those are. Those are federal vouchers where families can get subsidized housing through the federal government. And so the community had this vision where because folks right now who want to apply for Section 8 vouchers, there are about 172,000 folks who apply but will never receive one, and it's that backed up. And so they came up with this idea of wanting to recreate that program exactly the way it is, but through our state government. And we did. And I think when we introduced the policy, it was the first bill I actually introduced well before driver's licenses. And when at the middle of session, the numbers came back, the fiscal note for it came back $2 billion ongoing. And that is just like housing people, like 172,000 people ongoing, families, by the way, not everybody across the board. And so, we haven't built housing in a long time. We have a shortage of housing, and then we just, that's part of the reason why rent is so high. And so for me, it was about taking care of families. I brought in the Bring It Home bill with the community and their vision, and we got it done. We passed it. We didn't get as much money as I had hoped for. Not $2 billion ongoing, surprisingly. But we passed a metro-wide quarter cent sales tax for it. And folks from Greater Minnesota actually came back the end of the session and said, why were we not included in this? They are included in the program. They're just not included in the metro-wide sales tax. And so, we had $1 billion in housing. And we got a lot of it done, but, you know, housing is one of those things that we can't talk about Minnesota being the best place for families and kids if we don't have the basic thing of it all, shelter. And we have too many people who live in our streets, people who are coming from greater Minnesota because they don't have housing, and Hennepin County is the only place that somehow finds them homeless shelters. And still, there are, like in my district right now, there are tons of encampments because there's just no place to house people. And I think on a personal level, I think it's inequitable and not fair, not just to live in this state and to watch people live outside in negative 20-degree weather. And so, end of the session, I introduced a constitutional change, kind of like the way legacies form, statewide sales tax 0.25 cents. To build more housing ongoing, and to also continue funding the Bring It Home bill, which would be statewide. I think it will, you know, we will need, I think taxes is one of those things that can be really hard for our caucus. I think we have a diverse caucus, and so that is a part of it, and I'm hoping that we will find the political will. And I say the political will, not to raise taxes, but the political will to house people. And so that is my focus this next session. And there's lots of community, and if you guys want to be a part of it and help me lift it, please do so.
Great. What about you, Representative Kozlowski? What's on your list?
Oh my gosh, there's so many things. I'm like writing more and more notes as you're talking. Yeah, you know, our motto for this session was a phrase that Speaker Melissa Hortman had said in an interview, and it was LFG, like let's effing go. And unlike our friends in the Senate who have 4 years, we only have 2 years in the House. And so that means that we'll all be running, you know, next year again. And so that's our focus, is to keep this majority so that we can continue to work on the funding and the dollars. I sure hope that we have another surplus, but if we don't, there's a ton of policy that needs to happen and that we can continue to change. And so, you know, some of the reasons that drove me here, also housing, having served from, you know, couch to couch, and grew up with a lot of health inequities and education inequities, right? All of these things. So I think that for me, I'm spending a lot of time this summer just diving in and spending with community and recalibrating where needs to be, say, hey, you know, across housing, across economic justice, across healthcare, a lot of anti-violence work has been really the root of why we are seeing homelessness and mental health, where there's domestic violence, and all of these things that transpire out of, you know, 500 plus years of colonization. And so that continues to be my main focus. But I would say that within that, we know there's so much. Senator Mohammed touched on, you know, the constitutional amendment. I've got a bill that I've been working on with community, a revenue generator for housing to be able to get more housing supply. We know we have a massive mismatch. This year was the first year in 30 years, and really since the first of its inception of renters, that we were able to really tackle and advance renter rights, things like making sure that there's no evictions off of your income. We weren't able to get a source of income to make sure that folks who have like Section 8 voucher, it's guaranteed that you can find housing with that. So I think there's a lot within the housing. I would love to see us increase our budget. We had $1 billion. Housing is less than 1% of the entire state budget. Things like in gender-affirming care and healthcare access, we know that even though we've made huge gains to be able to protect and secure reproductive justice and gender justice, we know that it's Black, brown, immigrant folks who live in rural areas like here in Duluth, and more northern, that don't have that same access because of financial and transportation barriers. And I also, one of the things that I'm really excited about is to continue to get more people into office, especially folks of color, queer folks. And so that's how we're going to do this. And right now, I think having 35 out of, 105 lawmakers, like that's pretty good. But I would love for us to be overrepresented instead of underrepresented, because I really believe that, you know, historically excluded does not mean people who are down and out. It's people who've done more with less, and I think now is the time that we do more with more, whether that's for our regions, that's for our communities. We know that the fight in Bemidji is the same fight that's in North Minneapolis and East St. Paul to Duluth to Moorhead, and so continuing to go out and make sure that more and more Minnesotans who are telling us that the fact that we're here, they are paying attention. They watch the news. They wrote their legislator. They wrote a postcard. They showed up to an event. And the fact that you're all here, whether you're elected or you want to run for office or you do end up getting a seat or you don't, one of the things I would leave you with on this comment is Shirley Chisholm, who's the first Black woman to run for Congress, had said, if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. So I always bring my red folding chair in my office. But my adoptive mom said, well, doesn't matter how you get in the revolution. If you don't give us a seat at this table, we're going to chop that table down and make it into a sweat lodge. So I give you two choices, either get a chair or chop down the table and make your own table, sit on the ground, whatever you want, but keep showing up. That's what we're going to do.
I love it. Wow. Okay. How do I close with that, right? Obviously looking forward to reelecting all of us, like Rep. Kozlowski. We want to be back for another term. I'm also very much hoping for a supplemental budget. That is what I'm keeping my fingers crossed for. As was alluded to earlier in my bio, something that I've been working on since working for Congresswoman Barbara Lee, who worked for Shirley Chisholm when she was running for president, is computer science. And I think for me, that is very much an equity thing, because the way we work and the future of work and like how our kids will learn and work in the future is going to be dependent on technology, whether we want to accept that or not. Right now in Minnesota public schools, not everyone has the ability to learn how to code and how to work with computers. We all kind of have like a basic level of computer literacy, but our children and our grandchildren will probably all have to know a basic level of coding in the future. And so this year I got $500,000 for a working group so that we can start putting together a plan to put computer science in Minnesota public schools, and hoping that we get more money next year so we can train our teachers. We have a lot of really smart math teachers, there are some tech teachers, right? Like when I was in elementary school, actually, we had computer lab and we had a tech teacher, but that's very different than what our kids are learning these days. There are all these after-school coding programs that cost a lot of money, or there's like STEM camp. We want to make sure that everyone who goes to school has the opportunity to learn this, because this is already like a pay gap that we see widening. And so I'm going to continue in that work. And the other thing is also housing. Housing is a really big issue across our entire country. We know it is an issue in our state, but there just isn't enough housing for folks. And that's because we just have not kept up. And so I have a bill that I'm working on with Senator Mohammed, which we'll hopefully get across the finish line next year to address homelessness. Because there's like this whole continuum, right? But while we're working on building the housing stock, also want to make sure that we address our unhoused populations. So that's my list. But there's a lot more. But the only way that we can do that is to get reelected. And so working on that at all levels.
So I feel like your answers were the perfect setup for my last and final question. So as was noted earlier, we made a lot of headway in Minnesota this past election, but women and genderqueer folks are still only 39% of the state legislature, which is obviously not comparable with who actually lives in this state. So we need more of you all sitting in the Statehouse. We need you all to stay there, and we need to get you more friends sitting side by side with you as you're debating these bills and introducing new legislation and making change. And so as folks who ran for the legislature for the first time this last year, what is your advice for women and genderqueer folks who are considering a run in 2024 or in the future? What would you tell them if you could give them one or two key pieces of advice?
I have one.
Great.
Okay, really quick, I wanted to say back to the last question about just like the work at hand that needs to continue is also going in and shaking up how things are done. And so like to everybody in this room, to anybody who's watching the recording from home or on your time, you know, we need people who have these experiences. I sat in rooms after room after room of people talking about us as statistics, as little dots on the graph, if we even made the chart. And I got really sick and tired of it. You know, I thought, gosh, I think my people could run some circles around some folks with the knowledge and the power and the solutions that they have, not just for our communities, you know, bringing into this work for Duluth as a Native person, as a Latina person, as a queer person, but for the whole world, right? And so I think that us stepping into these spaces means that we can go in there and we can make sure that the dollars that we're sending, whether it be for housing or climate justice, in the grant-making process is actually getting out to communities who most need it and who are most impacted, right? That things like bonding, right, these infrastructure dollars that sound maybe kind of boring, but as this person who's a city nerd, we need you there because we have a lot of people who don't have lobbyists, who don't have the dollars, who don't know how to navigate these systems, who need us to go in and like blaze those trails and create that elbow room so that our communities can get, you know, dollars into our cultural community centers and mental health resources that are run by our people. A lot of capacity building. And so I asked my daughter this morning, I said, what would you say to a room full of women and gender-expansive people who are looking to run for office or looking to be inspired? Maybe they're coming here to a fierce forum or a fierce day and not feeling so fierce. And she said, I would tell them to trust yourself because it's already in you. And to think about being a trail runner, an ultra runner, that when I was running my 50-miler, the moment that I knew I was going to cross the finish line is when I stopped and I decided that I'm going to trust my legs to carry me over. I'm going to trust my training. I'm going to trust my crew. And so that's what I'd say to you is that trust your legs. It's in you. It might be just below the surface. It might be down deep. You got to keep pulling it out. But you're fierce, and it's going to go a long ways. And the thing is that if you show up with your fierceness, it's going to inspire everybody else around you to make them even more badass and make them more powerful. When I was running for office, I was outdoor knocking. I heard a lot of like, oh, you know, you're just not, you're not like the smartest enough. You don't have enough experience. We just don't know if you're going to be the loudest voice, right? And that really made me like question myself, but it made me question my ancestors. Maybe question who I come from and where I come from. And I was out on the door one day, and this person said, well, we already have enough women at the state capitol. And I was like, cool, I'm not a woman. I'm actually two-spirit, and also to the women in the room, is there enough women at the state capitol? I don't think so. So I said, I'm actually two-spirit non-binary. And they're like, yeah, we have enough of those. And I was like, Susan Allen's the only two-spirit person, and I would be the first non-binary person at the capitol. And they said, well, what impact would that have on my life? You know, and this is a person who's like in education, in business spaces, in our community, impacting our neighbors and the direction of our trajectory of our future. And I was like, we're your neighbors, we're your relatives, we're everywhere. We're business owners, we're doctors, we're lawyers, we're healers. And so I just want to leave that you have good medicine in you. You have everything that you need. And so just trust it. You got it.
Wow.
And we got you.
Yes. Sure. Well, that was beautiful. Thank you. And it's a little bit of what I was going to say. I'm actually the first woman ever to represent my district because we had like a 20-year incumbent, and I mean, it's always been like men. And it's because it's a district. It is actually one of the poorest districts in the state. It has one of the lowest voter turnout rates. But the St. Paul mayor was the rep before, and then it was like Tim Honey for like 20 years, and then we had John Thompson. So it was all these guys. And I think for me that's important because just similar to what Rep. Kozlowski was talking about, I think the way that I legislate and the way I work with people is very different than a lot of my predecessors. And part of that's just me being me, but also, as a woman, I approach things differently, and I know that. And I'm not transactional like I think a lot of people are at the Capitol, and I think that's something that we talk about a lot. But I always want to feel good when I'm making a decision. And I know if I don't feel great, then it's probably not the right decision. But I also know that, coming from a community and being a person of color, we usually lose out when we're in transactional relationships, right? Because we are not part of the power structure. And so I always, try to keep that in mind. And I think that's why, I lead by consensus, and I'm usually someone who wants to make sure that everyone wins in the end, right? And this is why I started at the very beginning saying I really appreciated that all of us freshman legislators could say, we passed bills or we brought money back to our districts at the end of the day, because I think that is really important. And so my advice, right, is to not doubt yourself, right? If you do something a certain way, which might be a little different than the way people have been doing it before, that's probably even better for you. So don't feel like, if you're not doing it the right way, and you're doing your way, that's probably better, which is something that I would say. And then just because we're talking about campaigning, I think it's also really important to think about what happens when you lose. We won our first elections, but a lot of people don't win their first elections. And so for me, again, I said this on another panel, my community is statistically not the wealthiest, and I think that's wealthy on time and also money. And so it's a lot to ask money from your friends, your networks, your family members. So I needed to make sure that if I lost, my community would still get something out of it. And I think that's really important, right? Just to have that plan, because you could lose. I had a competitive primary as well. And so I needed to know that it was worth it. And so I would just say that and close by also uplifting what Rep. Kozlowski said. It was really heartened to have a lot of young girls come up to me, and young Hmong girls who wanted to volunteer, who wanted to phone bank, because we have so many other male leaders in our community. And so just know maybe it's just one or two people, but you're probably going to make a difference in some other little girl or non-binary or gender-expansive person's life, because we say this, that representation isn't everything, but sometimes, especially during these times, after a pandemic, our young people, I think, are really struggling to find role models and positive energy. And so just keep that in mind as you're making decisions and you're running your campaigns. Good luck.
I don't know if I have much to add other than, I would say if you're thinking about it, do it. If you're doubting yourself, do it. Mm-hmm. And, I think most people who run for office, not everyone, do it with the intention of doing good and doing good for their communities, and they feel that they've been left behind. I think we all share a story of running. When I launched my campaign, I was 24 years old, and I had plenty of people tell me I had no business running for state government at that age. And I said, you're probably right, but I'll prove you wrong. And I would go and knock doors, and part of my district is on the wealthier side of Minneapolis, and the other part is super poor immigrants. And when I would go to the other side, which didn't represent me, I would bring my very wonderful campaign white cis male manager, and they would look at him and they would say, "Can we trust her?" And I would say, "Tell them yes," and he would be like, "Yes." And so I think that's a story that's often left behind. When I went to go knock doors by myself, sometimes people didn't want to talk to me. But even then, at 24, most of my friends were just graduating college, didn't have money. My family didn't come from money. And the one thing I wondered was if I could raise money and if I could knock that many doors. I won with the most votes in the state legislature. And I raised probably the third. I was one of the top fundraisers. And not because I had wealthy people giving me money, but because our story connected with everyday people across the country who wanted to say, I want to invest in this young woman, and I believe in her, and I believe in her vision. And so if you have a story, if you feel like your community hasn't been at the table for so long, then I think you should be your authentic self. Tell your story, tell them why you're interested in running for office, and please, do not be the person who loves the pin in the suit. We have too many of them. And I mean that in the most kindest way. Like, we had enough of them, and I think that you should love the job, and I love policy. I love reading about what's been left behind, and I think every policy I've introduced and gotten done this year, from passing hate crimes from the first time, driver's licenses, bring it home, all these things are things that reflect my experience, my lived experience, and why I think they're important, and it's, just do it. Don't let nobody tell you no. If this 24-year-old can do it, just do it.
Well, Senator Mohammed, they were not right, and I'm glad you proved them wrong. Thank you all so much for your time and for your energy and for your wisdom and for doing your thing in the Statehouse and for sharing all of your work with all of us today. I know you're going to continue to do that into the next session and far into the future for however long you'd like to sit in that Statehouse. We look forward to seeing you there and to sending more folks there to join you. So thank you all. I'm going to hand it back over to Beth, but please join me in giving one more round of applause to our speakers today.
Wow, that was incredible. We're hoping the legislators can stay for pictures for folks. We're going to take a break here in just a moment, but before we do, please make sure you're sharing your experience, the insights you've learned here on, hashtag Fierceness Forum 23 on all the socials. And I want to tell you about a tool that can help you do the work that we've talked about here at this panel, and that is the VRL HQ. And you can get there simply by going to vrlhq.org. All of our trainings, it's a repository for different knowledge, different videos and things that you can get started on your campaign, or maybe you're already campaigning. Take a peek at that. We'd love to have you at our VRL HQ. And again, we want to give another warm welcome to the legislators, and we're going to take about a 15-minute break before we get started, where you can learn your leadership style and move on into the afternoon training. Thank you all so much.